Before Rome perfected its aqueducts, before the great cathedrals of Europe rose from the earth, before the world had any inkling of what human ambition could truly build, a civilization was already flourishing in the dense, unforgiving jungle of Mesoamerica. It had no iron tools, no wheels, no beasts of burden, and yet, from the sweltering lowlands of what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, the Maya raised cities that rivaled anything the ancient world had ever seen. Pyramids that pierced the jungle canopy. Reservoirs that held entire cities alive through the dry season. Mathematical systems so precise they could calculate the movements of stars centuries into the future. This is not a story of primitive peoples stumbling toward greatness. This is the story of one of the most sophisticated civilizations the Earth has ever produced, and the extraordinary engineering that made it possible. To understand what the Maya built, you first have to understand what they were up against. The Maya heartland is not a forgiving landscape. The lowland jungle is a furnace of humidity, where rainfall comes in violent seasonal floods and then vanishes entirely for months on end. The soil, despite being surrounded by green abundance, is thin and exhausted quickly. There are no great rivers threading through the interior, no natural harbors, no alpine snowmelt to feed streams year-round. The Maya homeland offered its people beauty and biological richness, but it withheld the one thing every civilization ultimately runs on: reliable, controlled water. And so the Maya did what only the truly determined do. They did not adapt to the land. They remade it entirely. The earliest Maya communities, dating back more than 3,000 years, began as modest agricultural settlements scattered across the Yucatan Peninsula and the highlands of Guatemala. These were people who had mastered the cultivation of maize, who understood the rhythms of the rainy season and built their lives around them. But around 1000 BCE, something began to shift. Villages grew larger, trade networks extended farther, and certain communities began to accumulate the resources, the population, and the organizational capacity to attempt something far more ambitious. The age of Maya cities was beginning. Nowhere is the audacity of Maya engineering more visible than at the site of El Mirador, buried deep in the Guatemalan jungle and largely invisible to the world until relatively recently. El Mirador is not simply an ancient ruin. It is a staggering urban complex, home at its peak to perhaps hundreds of thousands of people and crowned by one of the largest pyramid structures ever built in the ancient world, the La Danta complex, which by volume rivals even the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built more than 2,000 years ago, La Danta rises from a sculpted artificial platform, its base alone covering an area that dwarfs most modern city blocks. The Maya who built it did not have metal tools to cut stone with precision. They did not have draft animals to haul the millions of cubic meters of fill material into place. They had human hands, obsidian blades, wooden sledges, and an organizational system of breathtaking complexity. The construction of El Mirador represents not just an engineering achievement. It represents the birth of a bureaucratic state, the moment when the Maya ceased to be a collection of villages and became something that deserves to be called an empire. Water, always, was the central obsession of Maya engineers. In the northern lowlands of Yucatan, the absence of surface rivers created a unique crisis. The Maya solution was to exploit the region's geology, a limestone bedrock riddled with natural sinkholes called cenotes, which plunged down to the underground water table below. Cenotes became sacred sites, portals to the underworld in Maya cosmology, and critically important sources of drinking water. But the Maya did not merely rely on nature's accidents. They engineered entire water management systems to supplement what the cenotes could provide. At the great city of Tikal, a metropolis that at its height housed perhaps 90,000 people in a landscape with no rivers and no lakes, Maya engineers constructed a network of reservoirs, plazas, and carefully graded causeways designed to capture rainwater and funnel it precisely where it was needed. The plazas themselves were not simply open spaces for ceremony. They were hydraulic instruments, their surfaces angled to direct runoff into interconnected holding tanks lined with plaster rendered so fine and so watertight that the systems remained functional for centuries. Tikal's central reservoir alone held tens of millions of gallons, enough to sustain the city's population through the long, dry months when the sky offered nothing. What makes this achievement all the more remarkable is the precision it demanded. The Maya worked without the benefit of modern surveying instruments, without levels or transits, without any of the calibration tools that modern engineers would consider basic. And yet the hydraulic gradients they designed were accurate enough to move water reliably across significant distances. They read the land with a sophistication that comes only from accumulated generations of careful observation, from a scientific tradition passed down not in textbooks, but in the living knowledge of master builders who trained apprentices in turn. The Maya did not separate engineering from cosmology, science from religion, the practical from the sacred. To build a reservoir was also an act of reverence. To align a pyramid to the movement of Venus was also an act of engineering. The two were, in the Maya mind, inseparable. No discussion of Maya engineering can proceed without confronting the most visually arresting of their achievements, the pyramids. The stepped pyramids that define the Maya skyline are among the most recognizable structures on Earth, and their familiarity can make it easy to overlook just how technically demanding their construction actually was. The Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, built in the 7th century CE, rises 65 feet from its base and was designed from the outset to house the elaborate tomb of the ruler Kinich Janab, pacled deep within its interior, a tomb that would not be discovered by modern archaeologists until 1952. The staircase descending from the summit to the burial chamber is a feat of internal engineering, constructed within the pyramid's mass and ventilated through a hollow aqueduct that the Maya believed allowed the soul of the dead king to communicate with the world above. The pyramid was not simply a monument. It was a machine for the afterlife, engineered to serve its sacred purpose with the same rigor applied to any practical construction. At Chichen Itza, the great city of the northern Yucatan that rose to prominence during the Terminal Classic period, Maya engineering reached perhaps its most theatrical expression. The Temple of Kukulkan, known today as El Castillo, is a masterwork of astronomical architecture. Its 4 stairways, each containing 91 steps, and together with the shared platform step totaling 365, encode the solar year directly into the pyramid's geometry. But it is what happens twice each year at the spring and autumn equinoxes that reveals the true depth of Maya astronomical knowledge. As the sun descends in the late afternoon, the play of light and shadow along the northern staircase creates the illusion of a serpent undulating downward from the summit to a carved stone serpent head at the base. The effect lasts for approximately 34 minutes. It requires a precise understanding of solar angles, architectural geometry, and the specific relationship between the pyramid's orientation and the latitude at which it stands. The Maya did not stumble upon this effect by accident. They designed it. They built it to happen exactly this way, at exactly this time, every year forever. The intellectual infrastructure that made such achievements possible was itself an engineering marvel of a different kind. The Maya developed one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the ancient world, a fully phonetic script capable of representing any word, any concept, any nuance of their spoken language. They invented the concept of zero independently of any other civilization, a mathematical abstraction so powerful that without it, modern algebra, calculus, and computer science would be impossible. Their calendar systems, interlocking cycles of extraordinary precision, allowed them to track astronomical phenomena across spans of millions of years. Maya astronomers calculated the length of the Venus cycle to within a fraction of a second of the value computed by modern instruments. They predicted solar eclipses. They tracked the movements of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn with naked-eye observations refined over generations of careful record-keeping. This was not mysticism dressed as science. This was science, rigorous, empirical, cumulative, and astonishingly accurate. The roads the Maya built, Sakbis or white roads, deserve a place in any account of their engineering genius. These elevated causeways, constructed from limestone rubble and coated in smooth white stucco, connected cities across the jungle and across the open limestone plains of the northern Yucatan. Some extended for dozens of miles. Some connected major civic centers to outlying districts. Some ran with geometric straightness over terrain that would have challenged any road builder in any era. The Sakbi was more than a road. It was a statement of political authority, a physical embodiment of the state's power to organize labor, to project control across space, to bind together the dispersed communities of a complex civilization into something unified and coherent. To walk a Maya road was to feel the weight of empire beneath your feet. And then, between the 8th and 10th century CE, much of it collapsed. Cities were abandoned. Populations collapsed. The dense urban networks of the southern lowlands emptied out with a speed and thoroughness that has haunted archaeologists for generations. The causes remain debated: prolonged drought, ecological degradation caused by centuries of intensive agriculture and construction, political fragmentation, warfare, a combination of all these and more. The Maya did not disappear. Their descendants number in the millions today, and many Maya languages are still spoken. But the great cities fell silent, their pyramids swallowed by the jungle that had always pressed against their edges, waiting. What endures is the testimony of what was built. In the stones of Tikal and Palenque, in the hydraulic precision of Caracol and Copan, in the astronomical alignments of Chichen Itza and Uxmal, the Maya left a record of a civilization that solved impossible problems with breathtaking ingenuity. Not despite the harshness of their environment, but in direct and defiant response to it. They were engineers in the deepest sense of the word. People who looked at a world that would not accommodate them and decided, collectively and over centuries, to make it do so anyway. The jungle reclaimed their cities in the end, but the knowledge they built into stone, the water, the stars, the mathematics, the sacred geometry, that has proven rather more difficult to erase. It stands still in the heat and the green silence, waiting for those willing to look closely enough to understand what they were actually seeing.